Hi, my name is Dr. Catherine Hughes from Crime Psych. I'm a criminal psychologist. I have done a number of these psychological analysis videos before where I draw on previous research findings to give an informed opinion of what an offender's behaviour can reveal about their psychology. This is not a diagnosis. In this particular video, I'm going to be discussing Bernard Giles. In all of the videos that I do try to focus more on the psychology of the behaviour. However, it is sometimes necessary to include more details. For the more sensitive person then, this video contains details of rape and murder. If you ever do want content with more details about the crimes themselves, then check out my podcast because I do include all of the details in that. In this video then, I'm going to give you, as always, a very brief overview of the case and of the offender. Then I'll talk about the upbringing and the childhood of the offender because this can offer valuable insights. Then I'll discuss their behaviours within that particular crime that reveal some psychological aspects of the offender. If you do want to learn more about the psychology of crime, criminal behaviour or offender profiling, I do have a number of online courses available, so I will leave the link in the video description below to my website. You can go check those out. You get a certificate of completion as well as full support with those. So then, Bernard Giles is a serial killer. He raped and he murdered 5 women over a 12-week period in 1973. He picked up young women who were hitchhiking in Florida. He lived with his wife and his 5-month-old daughter near to where he picked these women up. I'm calling these women as a collective, however, 2 of his victims were only 14 years old. The murders were committed fairly close together, but because there was a cooling off period of at least 24 hours between each one, he's termed as a serial killer rather than a spree killer. Giles picked these women up along a highway. He then drove them to an orange grove where he raped them at gunpoint and then killed them. He'd then return to his wife and his daughter and resume his normal life and day-to-day activities. There was some escalation in his behaviour which led to him picking up 2 girls at once. They resisted him when he drew his gun and so he tried to shoot them. His pistol misfired though and the girls did manage to get away. Fortunately, they had seen an envelope in his car with his name on, which they then passed on to the police. He was sentenced to 5 life sentences. He managed to avoid the death penalty by pleading guilty. With all of the offenders, or the majority of offenders I should say, that I've done an analysis on so far, there have been some events or event in their lives that you could identify as a possible trigger. Giles, though, was born in 1953. He was one of 4 children. His parents were law-abiding citizens. They were well liked and well respected within their community. People described them as being good parents and Bernard as having a good childhood. Most of his friends that were asked to describe him in quite a positive way. He attended school and he did take an interest in visual arts and he did have some successes in that subject. However, overall, he wasn't very academic and was regularly absent from school. He didn't perform that well in school and he dropped out when he was 16 years old. So he left school when he was 16 and he trained as an electrician. At the age of 19, he met and married 17-year-old Leslie Joanne. She gave birth to a daughter in July 1973. So, as you can see so far, there isn't really anything that we know of that was very much out of place in his upbringing or in his early life. However, we now know that he thought his life's mission as a teenager was killing women. He gave an interview with Piers Morgan where he talked about sexual imprinting. He said that when he was about 6 years old, he was playing a game of witch hunt with some children. He said that he recalled an incident where he was running into a back bedroom after a girl and he jumped on her, straddling her and pretended to strangle her. He claims that that was his first sexual imprinting. He also said that at the age of 16, he followed a woman and he felt very compelled to kill her. He said that he was walking behind the woman and had an opportunity that had presented itself to him, and he felt an overwhelming urge to kill her. He said that he had a knife with him, but he kept walking. He claims that he was glad that he didn't kill her at the time. He said, "I wished I'd never killed any of my victims." He says that he knew it was his life's passion at that point to murder women. According to the testimony that he gave in court, he began to make his first attempts to attack girls in 1969 after dropping out of school, but he was unsuccessful in those attempts. Between September and November of 1973, Giles picked up girls who were hitchhiking along a highway. He simply looked for an opportunity to get women into his car. He says that he'd never really had a preference for a type of victim. It was all based on opportunity, and any woman would have done. He was quite young and immature when he committed these murders. He didn't want any interaction with his victim. He said what I've said about many offenders in the past, that these were simply objects to him. These women were there to serve a purpose, and he didn't even want to know about the person that he was killing. Giles has claimed that there were at least 3 other young women that he held at gunpoint, but he decided not to kill them because they talked to him and, in his words, humanising him. He says that he doesn't remember any of the names of his victims. He says that he thinks the 3 women that got themselves off did so by engaging him in conversation. He even said he went to the home of one of these women, rolled a joint and drove around smoking it, and then he simply dropped her back off. Now this suggests to me that there may be an element of him not feeling seen by women. I don't know if this is related to one particular woman or to women in general. When he felt seen by them, he didn't want to kill them. He said that he felt very stimulated, very provoked when he shot his first victim. He'd wanted to kill a woman for some years before he managed to. He describes it as being so there in the moment that you can almost see the atoms vibrating. He says that it's difficult to describe that feeling. It certainly would have been an intense feeling for him at the time. I know that this is in no way comparable, but think about everyday life. If you imagine that you had a hero, maybe a singer or a sports person, you've always wanted to meet them for as long as you can possibly remember and had never had the opportunity to. When you do finally get that opportunity to go up and to meet them and to interact with them, it's so exciting that it feels almost electric. It's an overwhelming surge of excitement. He would have taken pleasure in the whole process, from at the very beginning, getting into his car, driving round, looking for somebody to pick up, then picking them up, then raping them, and then killing them. He said that his relationship with his wife wasn't that good at the time. This was a young man who was married with a baby at a very young age. He was very immature. He possibly felt very stressed with the responsibilities that he had. Raping and killing was a way of escaping that stress and indulging in his own pleasures at the time. His behaviour was escalating each time he committed a crime, and we see this pattern over and over again with violent serial offenders. It's as though they need to level up the amount of violence to experience the same high. It's almost a kind of drug where a drug user has to take more and more of a particular drug to get the same high because their body gets used to that. On the last occasion that he offended, he picked up 2 women at the same time. He took them to Woodland, but the 2 of them fought back, and so he tried to shoot them. But this time his gun jammed and the girls did manage to get away. They saw something in his car with his name on, and when they reported the crime to the police, they gave him his name. During his trial, he pleaded guilty to all of the murders, and he also admitted to a series of non-lethal attacks and attempted murders against others. He'd made a plea bargain whereby he was spared the death penalty if he admitted the crimes. He was sentenced to 5 life terms. After just 5 years in prison, he escaped with 2 other inmates. He was found 5 miles away from the prison 26 hours after escaping. He was found guilty of escape and he was given an additional 15 years imprisonment. I watched the interview that he gave to Piers Morgan in the series published on Netflix. Giles comes across as very emotionally blunted. He shows almost no emotion during that interview that he gives. He talked really quite matter of fact about the crimes, and he was shown pictures of the women that he'd killed. He didn't remember any of them because they weren't significant to him. As I said earlier, he had absolutely no interest in the person, and he viewed them as objects that were simply there to serve a purpose for him. Giles was given an opportunity during that interview to say sorry. He said, "I could say I'm sorry," but he couldn't even look into the camera and say, "I'm sorry." Giles claimed that he didn't know what to say. When I see this kind of behaviour showing a lack of emotion, my first thought is always that they could be showing psychopathic traits. However, this is the only thing about Giles that suggests this. He was shown a picture of his daughter, who he hadn't seen since he'd been convicted, and he simply smiled. He was asked how he felt about it, and he shrugged, smiled, and said, "What can you do with that?" He was asked how he would feel if somebody raped and killed her, and astoundingly his response was, "I certainly wouldn't appreciate it." Again, there's no signs of emotion. It's as if he never developed the maturity to show and understand emotions. Piers Morgan asked him what he'd say to the families of the women that he killed. He said, "I could say I'm sorry, but that wouldn't mean an awful lot." He was invited to look into the camera and say something to the families, but he just couldn't. Even after years of incarceration, he's never reflected on the crimes, the victims, or the impact that his actions have had. This is a very self-focused individual. He used a lot of "I" and "me" statements in the Piers Morgan interview. I'd say that he's never been able to develop empathy in much the same way as a psychopath can't. However, that's the only psychopathic trait that I can see with the information that I know. He is certainly a narcissist with a focus on himself and his own needs. I do hope that you found this psychological analysis interesting. Always, more importantly, I hope that you've learned something new from it. Thanks for watching then. Bye for now.